There is a bread in the Bible that saved a king's life, and almost no one talks about it. The Bible records a story most people completely overlook. We are stepping into the royal palace of ancient Jerusalem. The air is thick with the scent of burning incense and quiet desperation. A powerful monarch is taking his final labored breaths. His kingdom watches as his life rapidly slips away. Suddenly, a prophet walks into the crowded room. He doesn't bring a glowing, holy relic. He doesn't deliver a loud, mystical incantation. Instead, he brings a simple recipe. It is not the famous manna that fell from the sky in the desert. It is not the barley loaves Jesus broke for the 5,000. This bread was a specific physical mixture. God used it directly to reverse a clinical death sentence. Stop for a moment. The creator of the universe didn't use a blinding flash of light. He commanded the use of everyday food from a kitchen. This detail alone fundamentally changes how we view divine miracles. But the strangest part isn't that it healed him. The strangest part is the deep theological secret hidden inside how it was made, something the church never taught you. And exactly that is where we are going right now. The year is 701 BC. The stone floors of the royal bedchamber in Jerusalem are slick with sweat, and the air carries the heavy, metallic stench of infection. King Hezekiah is dying. He is at the absolute peak of his reign. The Bible records him as a fiercely righteous king. He personally tore down the pagan altars and restored the holy temple. He did everything right. But now his physical body is failing. He is not suffering from a seasonal cold or simple royal exhaustion. The biblical Hebrew word used in the text is shahen. This translates strictly to a severe, purulent boil or a burning ulcer. Stop for a moment. Think about the grim reality of that diagnosis. Medical historians and researchers in Israel have published studies analyzing these exact symptoms. Evidence suggests this was a highly aggressive form of cutaneous anthrax. In the ancient world, without antibiotics or modern medicine, this was a brutal, agonizing death sentence. Cutaneous anthrax rapidly multiplies in the bloodstream. The bacteria creates deep, black lesions that literally consume the flesh. The fever spikes to lethal levels. The physical pain becomes absolutely blinding. The royal guards stationed outside the heavy wooden doors listen to his groans. The entire kingdom is watching its greatest reformer rot from the outside in. Hezekiah is completely helpless. The most powerful man in the nation cannot command his own immune system. He lies in the dark, trembling, entirely unaware of how this story is supposed to end. He doesn't know what we know. He only feels the relentless approach of death. But the timing of this illness is completely terrifying. Hezekiah had just made a massive, controversial decision. He destroyed the Nehushtan. This was Moses' original bronze serpent. The Israelites were actively worshiping it. They believed it possessed magical healing powers. 2 Kings 18:4 records this exact destruction. He smashed the ancient bronze into pieces. He destroyed the ultimate healing relic. He stripped the entire nation of its magical crutches. And now, he is the one dying. His own flesh is rotting away. He has no holy relics left to touch. He has no ancient talismans to hold in his trembling hands. He is entirely stripped bare before God. Every single earthly safety net is gone. The king took away the bronze idol. Now he faces the terrifying darkness completely alone. The irony is agonizing. He shattered the historic symbol of healing. Immediately after, his own body shatters. The royal physicians step back from his bed. They have no remedies left. The room goes dead quiet. Hezekiah waits for the absolute end. The absolute end does not arrive in the quiet comfort of a fading sleep. The Bible records that God does not send a gentle word of reassurance to his dying servant. Instead, he sends the prophet Isaiah into that suffocating, disease-ridden room. And Isaiah does not walk in to offer a warm prayer of intercession or to gently hold the hand of the failing monarch. He delivers a chilling, entirely clinical verdict directly from the throne room of heaven. In 2 Kings 21, Isaiah stands over the rotting man and says, "Set your house in order, for you shall die. You shall not recover." The heavy wooden doors close behind the prophet, leaving the king staring entirely alone at the cold, unyielding stone wall of his royal chamber. This is where the Sunday school image of the perfect biblical hero completely collapses. Hezekiah does not respond with brave, stoic acceptance of a divine plan. He does not utter a beautifully constructed, polished theological prayer for the scribes to write down. He is utterly terrified of the agonizing darkness opening up in front of him. He is a broken man, rotting in the dark, and he completely falls apart. The text tells us he weeps bitterly, collapsing into a state of raw, unfiltered, deeply human desperation. Think about the sheer, crushing weight of that specific moment. Hezekiah had spent his entire life cleaning up the spiritual corruption of his ancestors, genuinely believing that obedience brings the blessing of peace. He destroyed the pagan altars. He trusted God when foreign armies surrounded the city walls, and he fought endlessly to preserve the sacred covenant. Yet, his final reward is a body consuming itself in pure agony, accompanied by a devastating death sentence from the very prophet who once promised him divine deliverance. The spiritual isolation in that bedchamber must have been absolutely suffocating. He is crying not just from the blinding physical torment, but from the brutal whiplash of a God who seems to have abruptly abandoned him at the absolute worst moment. Stop for a moment. Listen to the devastating silence in that room after Isaiah's footsteps fade down the long hallway. Hezekiah did everything right. He purified the land. So why does the righteous king get the absolute darkest end? What was God actually waiting for? God was waiting for the absolute shattering of his human pride. Isaiah turns to leave the royal palace. He walks down the long corridor and steps into the sunlit middle courtyard. But he doesn't even make it to the city gates. Suddenly, the creator of the universe stops. The Bible records a breathtaking, immediate reversal. The bitter, unfiltered tears of a broken man literally halt the God of the cosmos. God immediately interrupts his own prophet in the courtyard. He commands Isaiah to turn right back around. And the part that stops me every time is the sheer whiplash speed of this divine grace. Isaiah rushes straight back into the suffocating stench of the bedchamber. The clinical death sentence is reversed in an instant. God directly declares an entirely new reality over the weeping king.
Thus says the Lord,
I have heard your prayer. I have seen your tears. Then comes the absolute impossible promise. I will add 15 years to your life. In mere seconds, the unyielding, hopeless verdict of death is completely shattered. The rigid timeline of a human life is suddenly bent backward. Isaiah walks back into the stifling heat of the royal chamber. The air still smells heavily of decay, and the king is still shivering in the dark. But the story doesn't end there. God does not just snap his fingers and heal the dying monarch instantly. We always expect a blinding flash of divine light. We expect the devastating illness to simply vanish in a single breath. The narrative cannot return to fatalism now, but a specific physical action is suddenly required. God gives his prophet a shockingly mundane, physical recipe. The Bible explicitly records the instruction in 2 Kings 27. Isaiah commands the servants, "Take a lump of figs," and they took and laid it on the boil, and he recovered. Stop for a moment. Think about that exact choice of treatment. God had the absolute power to use a purely spiritual word from heaven. He could have used a lightning strike or sent an angelic touch to restore the king's dying tissue. Instead, he chose a sticky, mashed fruit straight from a common kitchen pantry. Hezekiah had just destroyed the magical bronze serpent because the nation turned it into an idol. Now, his ultimate salvation is not going to come from a glowing, sacred relic. It is going to come from the dirt. It is going to come from a messy, ordinary, entirely physical process. The most powerful man in Jerusalem must now submit to having a sticky paste of crushed fruit smeared directly over his rotting, infected flesh. The great king must trust the utterly mundane. I didn't understand it at first either. Why him of all people? And why figs? It sounds like a primitive folk remedy, completely disconnected from the majesty of a divine miracle. But modern science actually reveals a fascinating, deeply complex answer. Figs are biologically packed with highly active flavonoids and unique polyphenols. When the raw fruit is aggressively mashed into a thick paste, it creates a highly enzyme-rich poultice. This specific chemical composition is perfectly designed to draw out deep, severe bacterial infections from human tissue. Medical science confirms the profound, undeniable accuracy of this ancient scriptural prescription. A peer-reviewed medical journal recently published a study analyzing this exact biblical event. The researchers concluded that specific fig-derived compounds might genuinely be highly effective against cutaneous anthrax. This verifiable data changes how we must view the entire narrative of Hezekiah's survival. God didn't just invent a brand new theatrical magic trick to save the dying king. He didn't bypass the physical laws of the universe to prove his authority. Instead, he utilized the precise biology he had already perfectly designed inside the fruit. The cure for the lethal infection was literally growing on the ordinary trees right outside the palace window. The divine miracle was the perfect, sudden alignment of God's biological design with human obedience. God wrote the complex chemical formula into the seed of the fig tree centuries before the king was even born. Hezekiah's healing was quietly hidden inside the very architecture of creation, just waiting for the exact moment the prophet commanded it to be applied. Stepping outside the stone walls of Jerusalem, a dry wind blows across the terraced agricultural hills. This specific fruit was never an accident. The Bible records a staggering detail in Deuteronomy 8. God explicitly lists the foundational foods of the Promised Land: He names exactly 7. The fig sits securely on that elite short list. God did not scramble for a sudden emergency cure. He planted the exact biological antidote directly in the soil. He engineered this centuries before the crisis even hit. He knew perfectly well what was coming. He knew his most righteous king would eventually need it to survive. The cure grew silently in the dirt for entire generations. The roots deepened while foreign armies repeatedly marched across the borders. The physical remedy waited patiently through centuries of peace and brutal war. And so, at the exact moment of absolute despair, the fruit was completely ready. The biological clock aligned perfectly with the divine timeline. The antidote was always there. We return to the suffocating heat of the royal chamber, where the heavy silence of the room is suddenly broken by the servants going to work. Here is the deepest theological secret, hidden quietly beneath the surface of this entire ancient narrative. The specific biblical Hebrew word that the prophet Isaiah uses in the text for the lump of figs is devela. To be honest, when I first read this, I genuinely had to stop. I always naturally assumed that a true divine miracle meant God doing absolutely all the heavy lifting, leaving weak humans as entirely passive, grateful spectators. But the precise definition of the word devela strictly means a thick, heavy mass of figs. It describes a fruit that has been violently pressed, tightly compacted, and physically crushed by sheer force. The raw, untouched fruit, simply hanging beautifully on the branch of the tree, does absolutely nothing to cure a lethal, rotting infection. Many scholars deeply believe the healing inherently required a violent, intentional, physical crushing to properly release the necessary life-saving biological compounds. It strictly required actual human hands to take exactly what God had already freely provided. They had to intentionally press it against a hard surface until it became something entirely new. Stop for a moment. Think about the profound, overwhelming weight of that specific, unavoidable requirement. God flawlessly provided the perfect biological design, perfectly hidden within the tiny seed. But he absolutely refused to do the physical, messy pressing for them. The terrified servants standing in that dark, foul-smelling room had to actively participate in the sticky, uncomfortable reality of the king's cure. They had to press their own physical weight heavily into the harvested fruit. They felt the outer skin violently break and the sweet flesh yield completely beneath their stained fingers. The ultimate cure was a direct, undeniable partnership between perfect divine architecture and exhausted human effort, completely destroying our comfortable illusion of passive spectator faith. They could not just stand back and watch the heavens open up. They had to get their hands dirty in the actual process of deliverance. The God of the cosmos easily had the raw, infinite power to heal him instantly, with a single, effortless whisper from the throne room. Yet, he required the sticky, messy hands of desperate humans to crush ordinary, everyday fruit to actually activate the final miracle. And that paradox changes everything. This isn't just a story from a long time ago. This is the exact moment we must look in the mirror. Think about your own desperate prayers. How many times do we stand in the dark and beg God for a sky-splitting, deeply theatrical miracle? We want the blinding flash of divine light. We desperately want the heavens to violently tear open and fix our crushing crisis instantly, without any messy effort on our part. Meanwhile, God is quietly pointing to the ordinary figs already sitting inside our own house. The Bible clearly records this exact pattern repeating itself throughout history. Moses stood terrified at the edge of the roaring Red Sea, begging for immediate deliverance. Yet, he already held a piece of common, everyday wood in his hand. The desperate widow owed an impossible, life-threatening debt, but she already possessed a small, completely overlooked jar of oil in her kitchen. We constantly ignore the mundane tools, the simple talents, and the quiet resources God has already placed in our lives. Here is something fascinating. What if we reject them simply because they don't look supernatural enough to our demanding eyes? We refuse to crush our own figs. We wait endlessly for a glowing, flawless, holy relic, completely missing the perfect biological provision already growing quietly in our own backyard. But Hezekiah's exhausted servants did not ignore the dirt. They entirely trusted the remarkably mundane prescription. They heavily pressed the sticky, crushed paste directly into the dying, infected tissue of the weeping king. And then, the contrast becomes absolute. We must look immediately outside the palace walls. 2 Kings 20 reveals a staggering historical detail. It records what happened at that exact, precise moment. Inside, exhausted servants smeared crushed fruit on rotting flesh. Outside, the entire cosmos suddenly shifted. God directly manipulated the fundamental laws of the universe. He made the sun's shadow physically move backward. It retreated exactly 10 steps on the massive stairway of Ahaz. The Bible records this immense, undeniable astronomical event. Suddenly, the physical timeline of the earth bent in reverse.
The shadows.
Look at the sheer, breathtaking scale of this divine action. Inside the dark room, there is sticky, mashed pulp. Outside, in the open sky, a massive planetary disruption unfolds. God executed the highest cosmic miracle imaginable in the heavens. Yet, he paired it perfectly with the absolute lowest element on earth. He completely linked the moving sun to messy, mundane, crushed fruit. The infinitely large responded exactly to the profoundly small. The stars obeyed the same God who designed the tiny seed. This is the part I double-checked the most while preparing this video because it hit me personally. We spend so much of our fleeting lives desperately praying for God to completely remove the heavy, terrifying obstacles standing directly in our path. We sit in the agonizing, suffocating silence of our own dark rooms, pleading for a sudden, painless deliverance that requires absolutely nothing from our own exhausted hands. But the profound truth hidden inside the ancient Hebrew text is that the creator of the universe almost never works in total isolation from human effort. He flawlessly provides the supernatural, highly complex biological design, perfectly hidden inside the ordinary fruit. But you are the one who must actively do the difficult, messy pressing. Genuine biblical faith inherently requires your physical, intentional participation in the deeply uncomfortable process of your own restoration. You cannot simply sit passively on the edge of the mattress and wait helplessly for the lethal fever to break completely on its own. You have to take the raw, untouched resources God has already freely placed within your immediate reach, and you have to apply the heavy, exhausting weight of your own hands. You have to be deeply willing to get your fingers sticky, stained, and utterly dirty with the entirely mundane reality of your present moment. The clock is relentlessly ticking on the situations we face today, demanding that we finally step out of our spiritual paralysis. If you are facing a massive, unyielding wall in your life right now, and you feel entirely stripped of all hope, perhaps it is time to stop waiting for a theatrical magic trick. No one knows for sure, but what if the exact miracle you have been desperately begging for is already quietly sitting inside your own house? Look closely at the quiet, completely overlooked tools, the simple daily routines, and the ordinary talents that are already resting directly in your hands. God has fundamentally designed the perfect provision long before you even felt the pain. But He demands that you actively participate in the crushing. The heavy time for waiting helplessly in the dark is absolutely over, because the divine remedy is already fully prepared. You must make the definitive, active choice to reach out and finally crush the fruit. If you are deciding right now to stop waiting for lightning and start using the tools God already put in your house, type, "I am pressing my figs," below. I read every single one. The powerful resonance of this ancient story echoes directly into our physical reality today. You can still stand on the rocky, terraced hills of the prophetic land right now. The Bible records the enduring nature of this landscape, and historical geography confirms it entirely. Those exact same species of ancient fig trees still grow deeply rooted in that specific, sun-baked soil. Babylon came with absolute fury and burned the holy city completely to the ground. Centuries later, the mighty iron legions of Rome marched violently through the ancient gates. They completely shattered the heavy stone walls into broken rubble, leaving nothing but ruin. Entire human empires aggressively rose to immense global power, dominating the known world. And then they vanished entirely into the blowing dust of forgotten history. Kings died, massive armies were buried under the sand, and entire civilizations were completely erased. But the quiet, unyielding land still faithfully bears the sweet fruit of the ancient divine promise. Year after year, the biological cycle of the fig tree simply continues, entirely unbroken. Here is something truly fascinating to consider. What if the eternal covenant God made with His people is permanently tied to the very soil and tiny seeds of that ancient land? That quiet, living promise fundamentally outlasted every single brutal sword ever drawn violently against it. The relentless destruction of human history could not stop the divine provision from continually growing. The roots simply held fast in the deep dark, waiting patiently for the morning sun to finally rise again. Inside the quiet walls of the royal bedchamber, the heavy, suffocating heat of the agonizing fever finally broke. The thick, sticky poultice of crushed figs quietly did its necessary biological work. The aggressive, lethal bacterial infection completely died beneath the dark fruit. The Bible precisely records an incredible physical restoration. On the third day, King Hezekiah finally opened his eyes, deeply exhausted but entirely alive. Hezekiah slowly lowered his bare feet to the cold stone floor. His legs visibly trembled under his own frail weight. He had spent days absolutely terrified of the dark, completely convinced God had permanently abandoned him. To actually stand up required him to fully trust that the deeply mundane dirt had genuinely worked. He took a single unsteady step, then another. The Bible explicitly records exactly where he went next. He didn't walk weakly to his golden throne to immediately reclaim his vast political power. he walked straight up the mountain to the sacred temple of the Lord. Here is something truly fascinating to consider. He successfully lived out his fully promised 15 years in total peace. But he didn't survive because he was simply a passive, lucky recipient of sudden heavenly magic. He lived because he deliberately submitted his broken pride to the highly mundane, terribly sticky process that God specifically prescribed. He completely let go of his deep demand for a theatrical, glowing, holy relic. He humbly accepted the quiet, ordinary medicine of the earth. He allowed exhausted human hands to actively participate in his own divine rescue. The great king was finally saved by the dirt. This ancient, beautiful narrative leaves us standing quietly in the profound stillness of that sunlit royal room, simply staring at the completely empty bed. God purposefully designed the perfect biological provision, planting the ancient fruit-bearing trees long before you ever felt the sharp, terrifying sting of your own crisis. He wove the exact chemical antidote deeply into the fabric of the natural world, waiting patiently for the moment of your most desperate need. No one knows for sure, but perhaps the profound answer to your most desperate, tear-filled prayer might not be a blinding flash of sudden divine light. It might not arrive with the spectacular thunder you have been desperately waiting to hear in the middle of the long, exhausted night. It might simply be sitting quietly on your ordinary kitchen table, patiently waiting for you to finally recognize the profound, life-saving power hidden silently inside it. We constantly exhaust our own fragile spirits looking upward, continually searching the vast, empty sky for a dramatic, theatrical rescue that bypasses our physical reality entirely. But the deeply mundane, incredibly sticky bread that miraculously saved a dying king is a permanent, absolutely beautiful reminder of a profoundly different theological truth. The infinite, majestic creator of the massive, swirling universe is deeply, intimately involved in the absolute smallest, most easily overlooked details of your daily life. He fiercely cares about the ordinary tools resting quietly in your tired hands, the simple food sitting in your kitchen pantry, and the steady rhythm of your own breathing. You absolutely do not need to violently shatter the heavens to finally find him, because he has already graciously hidden his miraculous grace inside your completely ordinary world. The deep, terrifying darkness you are facing right now is undeniably real, but the perfect biological and spiritual remedy has already been flawlessly, entirely prepared. Look closely at the rich soil resting immediately under your own feet. Recognize the quiet, simple provision he has already faithfully given you, and confidently take the first, brave step forward. The profound, complete healing you so desperately need is already securely growing, quietly reaching toward the warm morning light, waiting only for your hands to begin the necessary, beautiful work.